Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I saw this. I always get annoyed by this, even though I try to tell myself to not get annoyed by it. Chuck Schumer was giving a talk. There's a small clip of Chuck Schumer having a conversation. And in this, he gives his best earnest face with his best earnest voice, modulated in just that political way, to try to obfuscate reality. Let's take a look. And by the way, they're back to talking about their values, whatever the hell that means.
We're not going to obstruct for its own sake, as Mitch McConnell did. Right. Too many people need too much help. But we're not going to compromise for its own sake either, just so we can say, oh, we're coming together in a bipartisan way. We are guided by our values. If a compromise can preserve those values, if we can come together without sacrificing our values, we'll do it. We're guided by basically an internal gyroscope of what's right and what's wrong. And that serves you well. We're not going.
That serves who well, Chuck? Who does that serve well? You're talking about your values. Tom Perez was talking about his values. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. I'm stuck in this situation of trying to compare what you're telling me with the real world phenomena that takes place. You understand you're on camera. You understand that you're in Congress. You understand that being in Congress, you take votes in Congress. Tell me about your values. Tell me about your values. When they were passing that right-wing healthcare plan, Obamacare, a right-wing healthcare plan, be honest. What are your values? That's what was asked. What are your values? What do you believe in? And the Democratic Party said, our values are the markets over people. In the words of Nancy Pelosi, we're capitalists. We're capitalists. Tell me your values. Because I honestly don't know what that word means, at least in the context that you're using it. When Obamacare was being passed, and I love this because this is emblematic, Chuck Schumer wasn't on board for Obamacare. Chuck Schumer wasn't on board. He thought it was the wrong strategy at the wrong time. The thing I want to get at, though, is the reason why he thought it was a wrong strategy, or one of the reasons. This is The Atlantic. Chuck Schumer upbraided his own party Tuesday for pushing the Affordable Care Act through Congress in 2010. While Schumer emphasizes during the speech to the National Press Club that he supports the law and its policies are and will continue the positive changes, he argued that Democrats acted wrongly in using their new mandate after the 2008 election to focus on the issue rather than the economy at the height of a terrible recession. After passing the stimulus, Democrats should have continued to propose middle-class-oriented programs and built on the partial success of the stimulus. Again, I don't know what that means. But unfortunately, Democrats blew the opportunity the American public gave them, Schumer said. We took their mandate and put all our focus on the wrong problem, healthcare reform. So apparently to Chuck Schumer, having millions and millions and millions and millions of people without healthcare was the wrong problem. The third-ranking senator, Democrat senator, noted that just about 5% of registered voters in the United States lacked health insurance before implementation of the law, arguing that the focus on the problem affecting such a small percentage of the electorate made no political sense. Tell me your values. Tell me your values. I think getting health care for people was the wrong strategy because those people aren't voters. It's only a small percentage of them that vote. So no, they don't have health care, but hey, they're not voters. What do I care about whether or not they have health care? Has nothing to do with doing health care because health care is just right to do. Nothing to do with that. To Chuck Schumer, it boils down to who's voting for me. Who's voting for me? Completely missing the fact that if Democrats actually did something that represented the people who they were supposed to represent, they may actually get those votes. This is not necessarily the chicken and the egg. Those were people who used to vote Democrat who all of a sudden decided not to vote Democrat. They stopped voting Democrat. You would think that Chuck Schumer would say, hey, why are these people not voting for us? As opposed to, what's the point of doing health care since those people aren't voting for us? If you're oriented by your values, if that's your gyroscope, if the thing that's in you is my gyroscope, my goddamn values. If you are, then you're not having this conversation where you're saying it made no political sense to do healthcare because those people aren't going to vote for me. Healthcare is right because it affects people in a positive way. If you're an American citizen, if you're a person in general, healthcare should be a right. Can we afford it? Yes. Is the rest of the world providing healthcare for their people? Yes. The values of the Democratic Party allowed for Obamacare to go through all of that time to get passed, and still had a situation leaving 20 million people or more uninsured. Tell me your values, Chuck. Tell me your values. Chuck Schumer is known as the Wall Street Senator. Chuck Schumer didn't get that name willy-nilly. Chuck Schumer got that name because he earned that name as the Wall Street Senator, because he took gobs and gobs and gobs of money from Wall Street. And do you honestly believe that somebody who took gobs and gobs and gobs of money from Wall Street in any way is going to regulate the market that gave them gobs and gobs of cash? I have no idea what Chuck Schumer means by values. This language that they use, in the same way that Tom Perez used this language, is purely used to obfuscate from the reality of the situation. Your party is an abysmal failure. Your party has lost all those seats throughout the House, 66 out of 99 state legislatures, the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the presidency. If you were guided by your values and your values guided you well, why do you lose so much? Why do you lose so much? I'm sick of having these conversations where these people use this language to obfuscate. The Republicans would say the same thing. We're guided by our values. Mike Pence would say it in a heartbeat. We're guided by our values. Mind you, he's a religious maniac who, in any moment, could start a war with a foreign country, or at the very least rip that deal off from Iran. Even Chuck Schumer, having this conversation about guided by our values, voted to allow a president that he considered to be a maniac, military, unguarded military, abroad. Chuck Schumer, as well as the other members of Congress, was given the opportunity to rein in Donald Trump's ability to use the military. Congress has a responsibility in ensuring the purse strings for the military. Well, Chuck Schumer didn't want that responsibility. He abdicated that role, as well as many other people in Congress abdicated their rights or their role in constraining the powers of the presidency to be a king. They fundamentally miss the issue. Not only do they miss the issue, they don't even approach the issue. The things that the Democratic Party talk about in no way actually addresses the issues that avail our society. You have massive job losses. Structurally, you're going to get job losses. Of course, people are going to ship jobs overseas if they can make more of a buck by doing so. So yes, they're going to do it. So when Chuck Schumer is all on board for these trade deals that allows employers to ship jobs overseas and fire American workers, then yes, that's going to adversely affect American workers. If this thing of automation, the Democratic Party has no solutions to any of this stuff. The ideas of climate change, this idea that your environment is falling apart. Whether you're talking about ecological damage, whether you're talking about environmental damage with climate, whether you're talking about this thing of carbon being so high in the atmosphere that's pushing down the concentration of the nutritional content of our foods. If you're talking about our oceans being polluted with plastic, if you're talking about the level of extinction events that have taken place over the last 50 years, this world is ablaze. This world is ablaze. The avenue that's supposed to deal with that is the left. You honestly believe this grinning idiot who's talking about his values in this kind of mock shiny language that doesn't necessarily mean anything? Do you honestly believe that that party is anything whatsoever that would handle and address the issues that avail us? They don't even talk about those issues. They can't talk about those issues. Having an honest conversation with those issues has to deal with who's actually paying and funding the Democratic Party. And they would have to go against the people who are actually stuffing money into their G-string. And they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. Look, I am cynical in the short term with regards to what takes place with regards to politics. I think both of these parties, the Republican Party particularly, is fundamentally bankrupt. Neither of these parties have the possibility or have the capacity to govern. I ask this question: if we're stagnant, if that's true, which I think it is, if we're in a situation where the parties themselves are completely corrupt and bought and in no way represents the American public, which you can make a damn good case that that's also true, then what? Then what? Have we passed the age of the revolutionary? Have we passed the age of the revolutionary? Has that language, this idea of the combustible dreamer, hailing bombs at the establishment, at the ruling elite, at what takes place as a hegemonic order, have we gone beyond that point? Are we at this terrifying and unfortunate situation where perpetuity is considered a virtue? By the way, perpetuity is no virtue. It is not a virtue at all. All structures, including political structures, it's just a structure. It's not given by God, it's given by man. All structures seek to persist themselves. They find this way of trying to maintain their integrity, maintain who they are. But it must be understood that those structures were created by men. And in the same way they were created by men, the very fact that those things exist in no way means that those things should continue to persist. Your act of existence, or just being, does not give you any legitimacy to keep going. I'm making this point that what we consider to be government, what we consider to be the way in which we've arranged ourselves, have we come to the point where that needs to be undone and reworked? Have we gone beyond the age of the revolutionary? I think it's a fair point. I think if we have, we've come to an unfortunate situation where stagnation is going to be a problem. One of the key points we need to understand, and I'll end it on this. Both parties have completely lost all reality of legitimacy. One party cheated one of the candidates in order to exceed their failed candidate, who ultimately ended up failing to reality shows. The other party was essentially torn asunder from a reality show host, beat the stuffing out of him. The American public itself wanted something fundamentally different than the status quo that it was given. Chuck Schumer screaming about his values. The Democrats have had 8 years to demonstrate their values, and they were found wanting. 95% of the wealth going to the top 1%. Oil, fracking, all of those things still on the Democratic agenda. Democrats will scream at the top of their lungs at any mic that they come across that Donald Trump is killing the Paris Agreement, but they were still on board for fracking, and no, they wouldn't change it even though methane is worse. They didn't care about the earthquakes to the areas of those people adversely affected. They didn't care about the water that was adversely affected by the people in the areas of the fracking. They didn't care about the environmental impact. I'm making the point that the things that they say does not line up with the things that they do. Chuck Schumer can scream about his values all they want. What this boils down to is, we understand, the American public in general, you throw a rock, any person that you hit, they will tell you as somewhat of a flat fact that the people in those offices in no way represent their interests. That those people are getting paid large amounts of cash, and they're leaning in the direction of the people who are giving them those large amounts of cash. Either you vote a particular way, either you toe a particular line, that cash will either be given to you or that cash will be used against you. Which one do you want? You have a disenfranchised public. You have a exploited public. You have a senseless and clueless public who works 40, 50 hours a week just to make ends meet and in no way pay attention to the large reality that we're dealing with. Have we gone past the age of revolutionaries? If so, we're in a bad spot. We're in a very bad spot. Chuck Schumer is comically ridiculous. And this idea that Democrats and values go hand in hand is absurd. I don't see it. Nobody sees it. Chuck Schumer can say this empty rhetoric all he wants. What it boils down to is, what do you do? What does it mean? Be specific. Stop giving me this shit about values. What do you mean? Be specific. You have automation that's going to be a problem. One job after the next is going to be automated. Whether it's going to be convenience stores, whether it's going to be shops, meaning these large plants and everything else. All of these things at some point are going to be automated. One job after the next. All of these taxi workers are going to lose their job. Most of the jobs in the United States are service sector. Those jobs are also going to be automated. What does Chuck Schumer and his values, what do they say about that? It never comes up. It never comes up. What about these trade deals, allowing jobs to be passed overseas, putting more pressure on American workers, allowing wages to be suppressed or even knocked down, firing the American worker that was getting $15, $16, $17 an hour and paying this all they got $3 an hour? What does Chuck Schumer say about that? Is Chuck Schumer really going to go against the interests of the people who are putting money in their pocket? I think we know the answer to that question. Right now, they can pivot against Donald Trump and the Republican Party because the Republican Party owns all the keys to the kingdom. And ultimately, the Democrats can seem pretty damn progressive when they don't necessarily have to get anything accomplished. The question becomes, when you were in power, when you had the opportunity to do something, you failed miserably. Pursuant to failing miserably, you have Donald Trump as president of the United States because those people wanted something fundamentally different. They were so beaten down. They were so vulnerable that they were looking for anything to cling on to. They found a reality show host that every so often would talk about jobs. And it was more than what the other person was doing. The most qualified candidate in the history of candidates, in the history of any universe, in the history of the multiverse. That person. They wanted a reality show host instead. Let's see. Hello, everybody. I just want to see what Jamal has to say about my voting mistake. You made a voting mistake? Democratic values is an oxymoron, isn't it? Look, values is somewhat generic. The question becomes, what does he mean by it? He's giving this impression that values in this case is somehow positive. Nobody knows what Chuck Schumer's values are. All I know is Chuck Schumer is the Wall Street senator. That's what I know. As far as his values are concerned, that's what I understand of Chuck Schumer. The guy who thought the Affordable Care Act was a bad idea, not because it was a shitty right-wing healthcare plan, but because it was healthcare in the first place. That's what I know of Chuck Schumer. If you're going to have this conversation with me about values, let's start there when we're having this conversation about values. Nancy Pelosi, we're capitalists. We're capitalists. Nothing gets accomplished in these parties. These guys are trying to pivot themselves as being the definitive left. If they are the definitive left, we are fucked as a society and as a world. They're not the definitive left. I don't know what Chuck Schumer's values are, but I don't know what Chuck Schumer's values are. I'll leave it at that. What I do know, I can compare what he's saying his values are with what these guys have done. When you give 95% of the wealth to the top 1%, when income inequality is expansive and massive, when you look across the rest of the world and you see the level of societal, the social safety net that they have in European countries, and you compare it with the United States, you compare what it means to be a lefty in those countries with what it means to be left in this country with regards to the Democratic Party. Those guys are right-wingers. He's talking about his values. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. Are you for universal health care? Yes or no? Are you for everybody going to school? Yes or no? Are you for universal basic income? Are you for federal jobs guarantee? What are you for? What do you represent? What do you stand for? Are you for increasing taxes on the people who put money in your pocket? What are you for? Don't tell me about your values. Give me the specifics of what you are actually for. We'll have the conversation afterwards. Up until then, values is empty rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything. Chuck Schumer could have wasted that 30 seconds whistling Dixie for all I'm concerned. That means nothing. He's trying to obfuscate and give this impression that he's one thing, what the Democratic Party is one thing. Why do you fail so much? Why do you fail so much? Answer me that, Chuck. Why do you fail so much? Stop telling me about your values. Explain to me why you fail so much. How do you lose 66 out of 99 state legislatures, the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court? You had a supermajority in the Senate when you came in. How do you fail so much? Why do you fail so much? Do you think the American people are somehow been deceived by this batshit rabid Republican Party? Or do you think they're just not that into you because of what you guys have become? That's what I want to know. Stop telling me about your values. Explain to me why you fail so much. Explain to me why the American public has been so disenchanted with you that they've gone to the most rabid bunch of Republicans in the history of this country. Explain to me those things. Don't tell me about your values. I don't know what that means. All right, I don't want this one to go too long. Oh, there is one thing I want to read before I go. This is The Hill, and I love this article. So, this is making a really good point. Chuck Schumer, the senator from Wall Street, Chuck Schumer, who joins Trump and the right-wing leadership of Israel in its American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, in opposing President Obama's Iran nuclear deal. Mind you, he was against the nuclear deal, by the way. Where Senate Democrats thinking? What were Senate Democrats thinking? Where were the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, avowed enemies of Wall Street billionaires, who apparently thought they were atoning for the absence without leave by joining Chuck Schumer and playing identity politics, by endorsing left liberal African American Catholic converted to Muslim U.S. Representative Keith Ellison for chairman of the Democratic National Committee? In what used to be called the greatest deliberative body in the world, were Democrats doing any serious... Jesus Christ, I'm saying this immensely poorly. In what used to be called the greatest deliberative body in the world, were Democrats doing any serious reflection at all on the results of the recent election? Was the exclusive club of 48 men and women just hell-bent on ignoring the toxic crony capitalism that Sanders excoriated during the race for the 2016 nomination against Hillary Clinton? Goldman Sachs didn't get his favorite $300,000 per hour speaker returning to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to relive the glory days of the roaring 90s, when the company's former chairman, Bob Rubin, was Treasury Secretary under Bill and Hillary Clinton's co-presidency. But the biggest of the banksters now gets consolation prize, with Senate Democrats selecting as their leader a politician who has accepted $575,490 in campaign checks from Goldman Sachs employees and political committees, according to OpenSecrets.org, which lists firms as the number of benefactors for Schumer from 1989 to 2016, which lists its firm as the #1 benefactor of Chuck Schumer from 1989 to 2016. Essentially, Chuck Schumer got $500,000 from Wall Street, from Goldman Sachs. That's what it boils down to. Given his Goldman Sachs golden political parachute, Schumer will probably feel right at home with former Goldman Sachs investment banker Stephen Breitbart Bannon, who was chief strategy for Trump White House. A very, very White House if alt-right Bannon has his way. That's besides the point. I'm just making this point that if you're getting paid this much cash, who do you actually represent? And if you're making this flowery language of values and everything else, I suspect that language is there to obfuscate, because you can't actually have real talk and real rhetoric about the things that avail your society and the people you're actually supposed to represent. That's what I'm getting at. Chuck Schumer talking about values is fucking ridiculous. I'm going to put both of these in the bottom so you guys can read for yourselves. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, rate, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks guys.